Hi, it's Joseph Gregory Hallett here. It's Monday, 31st of July. I'm at Dis outside a Templar church, and today I'm going to be talking about friends who are actually catch and release agents for the government, and they're sabotaging everything you do. What the government does is it surrounds people with the truth with idiots and criminals and street people and mental patients in order to derogate their story. So I'm going to be talking about Mark Windows, whose actual name is Mark Windsor. He was born Mark Craythorne. At the age of 12, he changed his name to Mark Craythorne Windsor. He called himself Mark Windsor. He got a job singing at a pub in a competition, registered as Mark Windsor, and it was written down as Mark Windows, so he became Mark Windows. Since then, he's changed his name to Mark Alexander Scott and probably changed it again, and he's also moved countries. Shifty is a word that I would use. So I second came to England. Well, actually, England doesn't exist since 1603 or 1707. So I first came to Britain. Well, actually, Britain was never a legal term. It was Great Britain from 1707. So I first came to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in 1988 and then 2010. When I arrived in 2010, I was giving a speech at St James's, the railway station, and Nick Colostrum was there and Mark Windows was there. And after the talk, Mark Windows came up to me, sitting on the couch overlooking the trains, and he says, after 20 minutes chatting away, he says, "I trust you completely," which is a bit OTT. It's a bit over the top. So I ended up staying with a reader who ended up being a nut job. So I ended up socialising with Mark Windows, who's Mark Windsor, who was kind of running Nick Colostrum, and both of them were catch and release. Mark Windsor was catch and release for coke use in the 1980s, and later things he did to me like theft and fraud and attempted murder or attempted unlawful killing. And Nick Colostrum owed £600,000 to a Turkish developer, so he was also on the run. And Mark Windows was on the run for 7 years in the UK from 2015 to 2022, and then he went to Bulgaria, escaped to Bulgaria after doing what I'm going to tell you. So I've made a list of things, bullet points, and so I might glance at it occasionally so I can stay on track and give it some structure. So I got Mark Windows to come over and film the Royal Marks in Portugal in 2013, and the Portuguese recognised him as a government agent, a counterintelligence agent. So that put a kibosh on a whole lot of moving forward. So what I am, because I know a lot, I'm a targeted individual, and there's couple of major ways that the British royal family target you when you know stuff about the British royal family and their frauds. One is heroin and cocaine, and the other is possession. So Mark Windows was he just turned dark, man, just like dark spore, like just a dust of darkness, and it was just overwhelming. Saw it a couple of times. So he was possessed, and his girlfriend was possessed, and Mark Windows was British Army 77th Brigade, and I looked them up just now today, and it comes up British Army 77th Brigade or 77th Brigade. It comes up error, could not process this GET request. So British Army 77th Brigade is in hiding, probably from all of their successes in sabotaging truthers. So what you've got now online, 99.9% of the people online are actually government agents there because of crimes they've committed, and that's called catch and release. So they're charged with a crime, convicted of a crime, the record of that is suppressed, and their sentence doesn't happen as long as they attack people telling the truth, which includes friends, colleagues, and relatives. And it is known in the Bible as bearing false witness, as in thou shalt not bear false witness. And it's like a last one of the last desperate attempts of the British royal family to maintain legitimacy through crime and maintain legitimacy through engaging criminals to act on their behalf, sabotaging those telling the truth, that know that the British royal family has been illegitimate for 440 years. I got a really small, thin tripod here, so it's going to wave in the wind. So just consider that part of the entertainment. So in 2014, I gave Mark Windows, who's Mark Windsor, a set of books of the Hidden King of England, and then I overheard him say to someone who owns a castle that he'd given them straight to Cameron and hadn't even read them. Now, I'm presuming that Cameron means David Cameron because he's Prime Minister at the time. So I was staying at a friend's castle on the borderlands between England and Wales, and I'd just come back again from Portugal, and I just arranged to buy a car, and I'd test driven this car, and it was like a Mitsubishi Estate, silver with all black leather, black carpet, 2 sunroofs, and great stereo, and it was really fast. It was good. So I was just about to buy it. It's cheap, you know, because the car's really cheaper, about 500 quid. And Mark Windows rings up and says, oh, I've got my van for sale. And how would he know that I was going to buy a car? So it's a red van. And instead of turning up with the red van, he turns up with his girlfriend, Niwa Marani, who was later on Britain's Most Wanted list, and the white van, new white van he bought, and he hadn't actually driven the red van in about 2 years. So he then changes his name. He then goes to Monmouth, and on the Friday, 10th of April, and changes 2015, and he changes his name to Mark Alexander Scott, which is kind of a hero's name. So obviously his possessed coke-using girlfriend had high expectations for him. So I ended up paying a deposit on the car, on the van, on the red van. It was like 300 quid, and then driving with him back to Walthamstow where he lives. And so we just mucked around, had a drink and chat and that. And so I got the rest of the money and bought the van, which is £550. And he said it's great van, perfect working order, fantastic. And that he wanted first option to buy it back. So I get the van and I drive away. Like I was only at his place for about 3 days. And he stole my 4.5 terabyte hard drive out of my suitcase, which had all of the information on Prince Philip's heroin trafficking. And Mark Windows was secretly working for Prince Philip, because Prince Philip runs all the catch and release who were drug users and who are possessed. Prince Philip ran the possession department at MI6, and he was the biggest heroin trafficker the world's ever seen. And he invented the seahorse so that you could drop drugs off in the sea, and drugs would go down, a thick line would go down attached to a thin line attached to the seahorse. And the seahorse would rise up at certain times at night, let's say 10 p.m, and it would scream for, let's say, 20 minutes, and a high-pitched double frequency scream. And you needed a special decoder to locate where that scream was coming from. And then you could grab hold of the seahorse, pick up a thin line, which would draw up a thick line, which would draw up the drugs. And when Prince Philip was sick in his last 2 years, all this heroin and cocaine, like 300 kilograms at a time, was washing up on the coast at Sandringham and on the east coast of Norfolk near Sandringham and around Brighton. So that was indicating Prince Philip. So to get back on track, I'm driving the car, this red van, and it's it's shuddering sideways and it's shuddering forwards and backwards at the same time. And I'm going down the steep road to Kent, and the van's just violently shuddering left and right and forwards and backwards at the front end, and all the disc brakes and all the running gear in the front were absolutely stuffed. So all the cars behind me pulled back because they thought that my vehicle was just literally breaking up. So I managed to get down to near Brighton where I was going, and I looked at the brakes and they were just red hot. The whole brake pads were red hot. And I later found out that it had actually torn a gash about that long, about 9 inches long, in the chassis on the driver's side. So it was like attempted murder, attempted unlawful killing. And later, when I saw him months later, he said, "I'm surprised to see you." Like, you know, he was confirming that it was an attempted murder, which his girlfriend was right into. And she was on Britain's Most Wanted list. So Mark Windows had the radio show Windows on the World, right? And he always had a transvestite in it. So the screen camera shot would go over the shoulder of a tranny. And then he'd talk whatever he talked and got about 300 hits. So disregarding all that, well, actually not, including all that, he was selling his house and a friend of mine was going to be there. So I actually drove up to his house in Walthamstow, and we're having a drinking session, the three of us and his girlfriend, Mark Window's girlfriend, Iwan Marani. And so I go and sleep in the van and then come back the next day. I'm sitting in the backyard about 9:30 in the morning. Mark Windows comes out and he goes, "She's held a knife to my head, neck, and throat and chest all night." It was a knife. And about an hour later, she comes out and she's totally possessed and completely insane. So I said, "Look, we've got to get her sectioned. You know, she's an absolute nutter." So we rang up her daughter, Iwan Marani's daughter. She didn't want to have anything to do with her. It was Mark Window's girlfriend. So we found out that because we needed a family member to get a section, because it's just dangerous to the public. So we needed a family member, and her ex-brother-in-law lived a mile up the road in Walthamstow, in the little cottages, little working men's cottages just before you get to the very gentrified area where the beers are £2 more. So we spoke to him, and he didn't want anything to do with it. So we went back and we're trying to get a sectioned and that. And Mark Windows gives up at 4:45 at night because he's just hasn't had any sleep, which is fair enough. So I leave in the van, chugga, forward and back, chugga. And he said it was a great van. And then I had to get a warrant of MOT, fitness test on the car. And it was like 501 quid, 25p. And the mistake that Mark Windows did is he left the previous MOT papers in there, which showed that it was a dangerous vehicle. So I'm going to open up the package on the vehicle. Looks like this. Yeah. I'm going to grab this out here, grab the middle section out there, and just show you. Looks like that. Yeah. And there's Mark Windows there. The Orm Trust. Yeah. So this is the previous MOT. There's the Orm Trust on the other side. It says warning, in my opinion, the vehicle is dangerous to drive because of defects marked as such on the failure and or advisory documents. So he had to fix all of these things. This is prior to me buying it, and all of these things here, which he didn't do, or they're falsified. And when I bought the vehicle, I said, "Oh, let's go to the MOT place and make sure it's checked." And he goes, "Oh no, it's closed." And the guy that he was talking about that did it had gone back to France, which is a likely excuse, right? So what I ended up with was wiper blades were on the dangerous driving, and I had to buy the wiper blades. and anything that's left over. And the main thing he did was replace the drive shaft. Even that had gone. So there's my 501.25 that I had to spend on it, right? And that's just to get an MOT. That's after 3 months of owning it. May, June, July, early August. Yeah, 3 months. So, and then there's another one for 159, and then another one for 65, and then there was another one for about 250. And the dangerous vehicle MOT, it shows that the brake linings needed replacing, and then I had to replace the brake linings. It's in there, totally worn. So he hadn't done that. So the whole thing was set up for a murder rap. And here's all the brake pads and the wear on the tires, right? So he hadn't done that. So it was a really dangerous vehicle, like it was seriously dangerous. And he said all the tires are good. That's after about a month, right? So blowing out on the motorway, which is dangerous. So here's me getting a new tire. So yeah, it was a nasty affair. It was attempted murder. So I said to Mark, look, you got to get rid of your girlfriend, this Nepalese girlfriend you got, Niwama Rani. And her 4 brothers were Gurkhas, so you know she was good with a knife, and she was threatening Mark Windows with a knife. So you know, it cost me about all up about 2,400 to spend on the 550-pound vehicle I bought him. The first bill was 501 vehicle to get the warrant, which means I can still reclaim it off him for dangerous driving. You know, it's a dangerous vehicle. But he's a government agent. Mark Windows is a government agent. His real name is Mark Windsor, and he's British Army 77th Brigade. So he goes, oh yeah, I'll dump her. But he doesn't dump her. And then he goes down to Cornwall. So that's about mid-July that I see him at his place. Then he goes down to Cornwall with his girlfriend, and he drives her to shopping malls. And she gets out of the car, goes into the shopping mall, stabs a couple of women, and gets back in his white van and drives away, and probably does it repeatedly in other shopping malls. And he rings me up just after it's happened, and he said, she's a complete nutter. I've just dropped her off in Coventry. And I've just been invited to speak at this festival just south of Sandringham Palace in Norfolk. And he sees he's dumped her in Coventry, but then he turns up at the festival with her after she's done the stabbings. So I do my speech, and then he does his speech, and then I leave the festival, and you know, I'm going, gosh, Mark Windows, man, what Jack? You know, he's just so weak around women. It's incredible. And she's really dangerous, and she's really, they're both heavily possessed, right? Heavily possessed. And they're both, like, she was a 500-pound a day coke user turned hairdresser. And Mark Windows was a big coke user in the 80s. He told me that himself, and I'm not using that against him. I'm just saying, you know, giving some background. And he changed his name to Mark Windsor and then to Mark Alexander Scott. So obviously he had grand plans for himself, but it appeared that he was actually doing attempted murders, like several of them. So after the festival, Niwama Rani gets put on Britain's most wanted list, so the 10 most wanted people, for the stabbing of women in a supermarket, in a shopping mall. And so he sticks her under one of the divans. The white van had like single divans on either side, and he sticks her under one side, and then he drives her across the border, probably on the ship. Could have been, yeah, on the ship, probably to Holland, and then sets her on, gives her a bunch of money, and then sets her on the way back to Nepal. And the whole exercise with her costs him about £70,000. You know, she's just dribbling money out of him, even when she's in Nepal, having done all these horrific acts. he's still sending her money, so maybe she had stuff on him. So Mark Windsor, Mark Alexander Scott, Mark Craythorne, then goes to Lord Ashcroft and gets him to speak to the judge on his behalf, getting Niwa Morani removed from Britain's most wanted list because she's no longer in the country. And he knows she's no longer in the country because he was the one who got rid of her, took her out of the country. Yeah, so, and then Mark Windsor was on the run from 2015 to 2022 for 7 years, staying at various people's places. No one knew where he was. Occasionally he'd turn up to a small festival, but he'd be in hiding by himself. And then he went to Bulgaria. And what happened was his hair went completely bald, so he's left with half an inch of hair all the way around the edge, like he'd been heavily tonsured like a monk, and someone had shaved the whole of his head. And he used to use spray on ginger curly hair and spray it on. So he does that, and he's walking around Jerry's, etc. And he's got this MI5 woman who's reasonably good looking, who's making him look good on his send-off to Bulgaria. So he goes and stays in Bulgaria, presumably in a solitaire in a MI5 safe house. So that was Mark Windsor. He's catch and release. Government agent for, cocaine use, alcoholism, and attempted murders. And he ran Nick Colostrum, who, when he came back recently to get a visa from Bulgaria to England, he was, hanging out with Nick Colostrum again, and Nick Colostrum owed £600,000 to a Turkish developer, so he was also catch and release, which is probably why his stories go so far and then don't. Yeah, so what the government does is surround you with cocaine users, heroin users, murderers, idiots, catch and release people, and really just tries to stuff up your life and stuff up your reputation in order to surround your truth with a bag full of garbage. So my recommendation is stay away from Mark Windsor, whose real name is Mark Windsor, who's a government agent and is getting preferential treatment because his stepfather was involved in counterintelligence as well, so that's where he learnt it. So I think he's been a narc the whole time from the 80s. Sorry to say, he was a friend. Now I'd say he's very dangerous. He's got a very dark energy, and he's a Satanist, and he does curses and he sings songs about people to curse them. He did that to me, and he's just nasty piece of work, man. Just nasty. So beware, be warned. You've seen it here.